Hello everyone, Dr. Nick Hilverman here with another edition of Things I Didn't Learn in Med School. Today I want to talk about the war on private practice. This is an important topic for me. It's one of the main reasons why I went into private practice. It's one of the main reasons why I didn't join the hospital system, and it was really eye-opening for me when I started to learn about this stuff and how I started thinking about medicine and the healthcare industry. So you might see me get a little animated during this conversation, and it's all in the same nature of why I am where I am today. It was timely when I was doing my research for this. I came across this article in the Physician's Pain Journal, the March/April 2022, and it was talking more about COVID and how it impacted physicians and private practices, and specifically pain practices. But there was a interesting study and a quote that I wanted to read. Just want to let you know, I wrote a handful of notes, more data points than I usually talk about, and more numbers than I usually talk about. So I put some notes on the monitor here, so I'll be kind of looking over to read those. So what this journal said was Medicare physician reimbursements has only increased 11% from 2001 to 2020. Meanwhile, the medical practice costs has increased 39% during that same time period. Even more so we adjust for inflation, that the Medicare pay actually decreased 22% over that time. So it's interesting that we think about this when back in 2001, probably in the upswing or towards the end of the upswing of private practices in America, it's actually been harder and harder to keep those Medicare patients with the proper reimbursements over that time period, and also the cost of the office go up. So we're really seeing a 22% decrease in practice reimbursement from these Medicare patients. And in that same time period, hospital systems actually increased 60% of their revenue. We'll talk about a little bit why that happened and how that happened here in a little bit, but so now you can start to think about, okay, wow, why it's so hard for private practice physicians to strive and make it out there, and why hospital systems are now making tons of money, hiring physicians, buying out practices, and that stuff. So just some things to think about. Another interesting stat that we found here is that 3 out of 4 doctors are employed by a hospital system or a big orthopedic group. So back probably 20, 30 years ago, it was more 40 to 50% were employed. So that's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Here's another pretty interesting fact, that 85% of physicians under the age of 40 are employed. That's crazy, because that's our generation. That's my generation. That's a lot of the people that are watching this video. That's a lot of people that are medical students, residents, and fellows. If we continue with the data in these trends in the next few years, it seems like you're going to be more than likely employed by a hospital or a big physicians, or not a physician group, but a bigger group. So this is why it's really important. I mean, this is why I'm making one of these videos, and I want people to be aware of it, and really to try to go through some pitfalls and some interesting points that you might find useful when you are doing your job search, or if you decide to go to private practice. Another very interesting thing that I found is that women are way more likely to be employed than men, and it's like 80% of women are employed. And if we go back to the 2019-2020 data, that was about, it started about 2017, 2018, where there's actually more women being accepted and going to medical school and actually graduating medical school. So if we continue that trend, that means that there are going to be more women that are going to be graduating from residency and fellowship right around now and in the next few years. So that means that if this trend in data continues, is that women are going to be more likely to be employed instead of going out on their private practice. And I think that's a trend that should be made aware, and then hopefully this is a trend that we can battle and really want to say, I encourage women out there, if you want to do a private practice, to see if you can, get enough support, get enough help from your friends and family and resources such as mentors and getting in the right contacts and going out and exploring this realm of private practice on your own. You might lose some job security or some income security, but I think the work-life balance will turn out in your favor. Give a prime example of this. My mentor, friend, Dr. Andy Purcell in California, she is a pain physician, and she was in private practice, and over the past few years, she's really built up herself as a doctorpreneur, as Christy Owenby from Moxy always likes to say, is, she became an entrepreneur, and Dr. Purcell has really taken that on and grew herself into an entrepreneur, and now she doesn't see that many patients on a day-to-day basis, and she does a lot more of the business side of things, and she really enjoys it. So it's an encouraging story for women out there. If you do want to go to private practice, there are ways to do it, and I'm in a position where I want to advocate for these people. Is like, I encourage you to do it, and I hope you do. I get it, it's not always the safest route, and there are other options, and it can always come down to your goals. If your goals are a little bit different than doing that, then that's completely acceptable as well. But I think it was an interesting trend that I think people should be aware about. Moving to another point is that practices that are owned by hospitals, they actually had increased admission rates and readmission rates, and even at some of these being unnecessary. And this was from the Annals of Family Medicine. It was in another article that I read. So that's something to think about, is that there's no proven data that these hospital-owned groups are helping. There's no data to show that it's better outcomes. It's just more money for the hospital systems and mainly the C-suite executives. That money doesn't get redistributed to the physicians. In fact, a transition to our next point is, if a private practice gets bought out by a hospital system, then the revenue generated for that physician can actually lose $10,000 up to $100,000. So you might see a real big hit in your salary. If you're not in a financial stable place, that could be life-changing money. But the other thing is, it's not just a salary loss. It's other things that you can do for business write-offs as tax exemptions, such as like travel for conferences or business meetings, health insurance, travel for business with, even your gas mileage can be written off if you're doing certain business, driving, cell phone bills, office supplies, health insurance. I guess if you're employed by a hospital system, you would have that system pay for your health insurance. That might be a moot point, but these are a lot of things to think about. So, again, really find this stuff interesting, and just goes to the point that these hospitals, when they acquire these practices, the physician's fees salary can actually decrease. Sure, they take on the administrative burden, they help with the prior authorizations, they help with getting patients in your door and all that stuff, but at what point? You might be working harder for less money. And now here's the other big kicker, that the hospital revenues actually increased by 20%. So, I talked about, these hospitals in the 2001 to 2020 time period increased their revenue by 60%. So it's like, how does this work? So this kind of goes back to the contracting on one leg. So the contracting means, as a physician, you contract and negotiate rates with the payers. So, for example, after fellowship, I had to go out to all the payers. I had to sign up for negotiated contracts, and then they would send over reimbursement schedules and fee schedules and that kind of stuff. And we would essentially, as you start out, you don't have a lot of leverage, so you have to kind of accept what they send to you. And usually it's much less than it would be than a hospital system. And the reason is I have no leverage. I have no proven data. I have nothing out there that can show that that I'm doing standard of care, I'm having good outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the hospital systems, what they do is they will go to the insurance companies and make, hey, listen, we will employ the 10 best doctors in the area if you give us a better rate for our contracts. So that's kind of how they leverage. Now, as a private physician, you can grow this leverage over time, especially if you can track some good data. I'll get to that in a minute. But that's what the hospitals do. And then they continue to negotiate. Year after year after year, they continue to negotiate with the insurance companies. Now, the Medicare rates are what they are. They're kind of baseline, but every insurance company bases their schedules off of Medicare, from 1.5 times to 3 times, depending on the insurance company. And that's where they really make up the revenue with those private payers. So, again, we'll look at it. The physician yourself might make less money, but these hospital groups use you as leverage to negotiate better rates, and that can increase their revenue through that. So like a basic example is, if I do an epidural in my practice, might get $130, $150 depending. But if the hospital does it, first they own the surgery suites in the hospital, so you get a big facility fee. But on top of that, that physician fee might also be increased to, maybe 2 or 3 times what I would get paid in the office. So that's kind of how they use their leverage. And again, they use this every year. So that's how we got a 60% increase in pay to the hospitals in that 19 years prior. And I think I just alluded to this, is that, there's actually absolutely no data to prove that these hospitals give better outcomes. And I think that's one of the most important points, is we're doing this based off of just insurance companies and hospitals kind of doing these backdoor negotiations without any proven data. So I think in the future, what we can do as private practice physicians is leverage our own data and patient tracking to prove to our insurance companies, hey, look at my outcomes. Look what I'm doing for my patients. Look how well they're doing. Let's talk and see if we can negotiate a better rate. So there's a couple companies, Algos Pathway and Doctor's Plan, that can kind of do data tracking for you. The patient questionnaires come to their phone or come to their email, and they can really help utilize that information to show data on each individual patient, and then you can conglomerate it into a big presentation to help show your insurance companies. These softwares, these companies, they were brought to my attention by Dr. Giuffrida and Dr. Ptacek. They were the one that were kind of showing me like, hey, this is where the data is, and this is what we're doing for our data tracking. And now we want to use that for leverage to show our insurance companies what we're doing and why we're doing better outcomes in hospital systems. I don't have any partnerships with either of those companies. I just utilize both softwares right now. I do think they're both great, and I highly implore you to take a look and see if they're going to be beneficial for you in your practice. But this is actual data tracking, and we can use that to counter against the hospitals that aren't using data tracking on these patient outcomes. I use Athena medical record system for my EHR, and I just discovered this thing in there, this neat little feature that says negotiate better contracts. And I think it's doing a similar thing to tracking data from how many patients of Medicare or Medicaid I'm seeing, and then I can show this to insurance companies. And I don't know if it really shows outcomes. I haven't explored too much into it, and something I'm going to look into, but it's advertised on the EHRs to negotiate yourself better contracts. These contract negotiations come every year or every few years, so sometimes it's worth doing it yourself, but you can also hire other companies around $1,000 to $3,000 depending on the company and how many physicians you have that can help negotiate your contracts on your behalf. And if you can give them more data to show the insurance companies, that's only going to help your bottom line even further. And I don't think enough private practice physicians do these kind of things and think about it. They're like, oh, well, I'm seeing a bunch of patients, whatever. But, as we have inflation, as we have increased costs of running a practice, it's important to use these data points to help leverage yourself. So you're at least keeping up with inflation, if not actually getting better rates over time. And then you're not necessarily having to see more patients just to make your same amount of money you're making prior. So, it's not the cleanest transition to the next part, but it's kind of, I wanted to bring up a point about, these hospitals making the 60% more, and their hospital revenue can increase 20% in that same year if they acquired a practice. And how does that happen? So the reason that happens is if I'm a specialist and a patient gets referred to me, a lot of times I refer from private practice doctors. But within a hospital system, you guys, the hospitals are required to send a patient within their own hospital system. So what does that look like? So if a patient goes to a private practice, their primary care physician in the hospital system with back pain, they will say, okay, why don't you go see our back pain specialist? He's in our network. He'll have all the notes and all that stuff. Okay, great. So the patient will go there and see the doctor within the same network. They do whatever they need to do, and from there they'll work them up and et cetera, et cetera. So if that doctor that works in the hospital system wanted to send that patient to me, they would get dinged. This probably isn't legal. This probably shouldn't happen, but this is the truth. And I think legally they're not allowed to really get in trouble, but they get dinged. And how this was explained to me was that the hospital system will send an administrator to go sit in that doctor's office, that primary care doctor's office, and but they will monitor every outgoing referral. Every outgoing referral better go to a specialist within that hospital system. Right. Now you're like, oh my gosh, I never knew this. How's that even legal? How's this possible? But this gets better because I, as a specialist, offer certain procedures that those hospitals don't offer. So, not only are the patients not getting every treatment option viable for them, but they're also only getting referred to the physician who only can help them in certain ways. So, there's a prime example of this. I was out to dinner last night, and the gentleman I was talking to was explaining to me, he's like, yeah, I went to this doctor, and he said I have 3 options. And this was a big hospital system. I have 3 options for my back pain. I can either get the medial branch blocks radiofrequency ablation, I can get an epidural steroid injection, or I can get surgery. And that's it. It's like, and this was a fusion surgery, not just like, and like, that's it. I'm like, that's crazy because, and it's funny, he said he already tried the medial branch blocks and it didn't work, which the doctor didn't go back and look at the chart and see that it didn't work. That's another story for another time. But this is what he said. And the physician didn't give him any other options or anything. And the patient's like, so what do I do? And then, we were just talking and chatting. It's like, listen, first off, he explained all this wrong. If that medial branch block didn't work in the first place, I said, okay, great. Now we know what didn't work, so we got to figure out what will work for you. That's how I approach it. But for that physician, he's like, well, it didn't work. I guess you'll lay it down to 2 options. It's like, no, let's try to figure out where your pain generator is. Again, that's more of my algorithm and dogma. We can talk about that some other time. But I'm sitting here in the back of my mind. It's like, I'd love to go look at your MRI because I know there's tons of other things I can offer you that this doctor doesn't. Because if I worked at that hospital system and I want to do one of these newer procedures that has data because it's been shown in different countries or shown in clinical trials, and it might be a newer device or a newer procedure that a lot of people don't do. So to get it approved at a hospital system, it might take months to years. You have to sit down with the board of surgery. You have to sit down with the board of internal medicine. You have to go to the hospital committee and propose it. You have to show the data. It's a long and torturous process. And then they have to vote on it. And they usually don't vote on it that month. They'll vote on it, put on a docket for 3 or 4 months later. I'm going through this with hospital systems in Columbus right now because there's procedures that would be very beneficial for their patients. But to get this in front of the board is like, it's been 6 months, 7 months since I've been trying to do this, and I still haven't talked to the board. I've only gotten in contact with the internal medicine staff there that's been able to kind of expedite it, but I still haven't sat in front of the board, and they've always simply proposed it. So just think about that. So, if you're a patient or you have a loved one that's, injured or needs a surgery or something, it's like, and you go to a hospital system, they may not have the best solutions for you or your loved ones. So I would encourage you to go get a second opinion from a private practice physician that does offer things that are outside that typical scope of the hospital systems. And again, so this was a big reason why I went into private practice, because every hospital I went to, I said, hey, I want to try this procedure or do this because I did in fellowship. We saw good outcomes. They're like, well, it'll take some time. And we don't really have the data behind it. And what I'm seeing now from my fellowship, which started in 2019, and now we're sitting in 2022, now some of these hospitals are finally adopting what they were doing back then. But that stuff is kind of getting outdated, and we've increased research, we've started other techniques, we've started other things, and now those things are starting to come to fruition, and now those would be the new standard of care, in my opinion, not what we were doing 4 years ago even. So something interesting to think about. And like I said, I always tell patients is like, if they're in these big hospital systems, like, go get a second opinion from someone outside just to see what they say, just to see if they have other options for you. These big hospital systems, they only have one agenda: to get more revenue for their shareholders. They do not care overall about patient health. They do not care overall about the outcomes. They don't care about any of that. They just want to make sure that they're protected and that they have money for their shareholders. Now, I'm not saying that the doctors themselves don't care. I'm not saying the staff don't care. And I don't even want to say that the people in those C-suite that I bash on so much, that they don't care. But the proof is kind of in the pudding, right? Like, if you look at these things from a 10,000 foot lens, you're looking down, it's like, this is a little bit different than, what you're saying and what you're actually doing are two different things. And this is more in the physical medicine, rehabilitation, and the interventional spine world. I can't really speak too much about the internal medicine or even other surgeries. I just want to put that out there. And I know I'm being really harsh on these systems, but this is the truth. This is something that you should look into. There's tons of paper trails and there's tons of articles that talk exactly about this. And as I've harped on this point before, is like, none of this that the hospitals do have proven better outcomes for our patients. So if we want better outcomes for patients, we should be looking to the people that are pushing the scope of medicine with good data, with good science, with good techniques. I know we're in a gray area with a lot of people trying to do things that are outside the scope of medicine, or snake oil salespeople out there, and I don't want more of that in the industry, because we see how that misinformation and disinformation can be toxic to the health environment and to our own psyche and how we approach medicine and distrust in doctors and healthcare systems. But there are other people out there that are doing good work, that are looking into the actual science, that are actually data tracking and all this stuff that's important for you to realize. The last major point I want to talk about is how these health insurance companies are capped at about 15 to 20% of revenue that they can make off of certain healthcare costs. So, they can't continuously just keep driving their prices up and up per patient kind of thing. And I don't know all the details about it, but they found a loophole around this. So, for example, Optum Health, which is a subsidy of United Healthcare Insurance Company. Now, what they do is they go around and they purchase physician groups and ambulatory surgical centers, and they make those centers of excellence, not real traditional centers of excellence, but they make them centers for those providers specifically. So what this means is Optum Health will buy the surgery center, and they tell all their patients, oh, go to this surgery center because you'll get a better discount, you'll get a better rate, and all this stuff. But what this in turn is actually doing is giving more revenue to United Healthcare. And there's no cap on this because it's the subsidy, Optum Health, that owns the ambulatory surgery center and not the health insurance group. So think about that. If I get sick and I have United Healthcare, they require me to go to a certain doctor. Not require, but they say, oh, you're going to get a cheaper rate. You're going to get better care. You're going to get in faster. Or surgery center, same thing. Now you can start to see now this is getting a really, really gray area. So not only are the health insurance companies only in it for profit, as we know, but they're referring patients to their own surgery centers just so they can make more money in the back end. Right. I mean, like this is laughable at a certain point. So the whole purpose of this video is to bring to light these topics of private practice and why it's so difficult for private practice, especially a small entity of myself, where it's just me as a provider, to help grow and scale and to help battle. This isn't just the big hospital centers, but there's big groups. There's big private primary care groups. There are big orthopedic groups. It's all kind of the same realm, and I just want patients and people to be aware of this. The last thing before I close is, if you want to go into academic medicine, if you want to go join these groups, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I think it's a great career option. I think if it gives you good money, good job security, a good work-life balance, that's great. Especially if you want to do research papers and you want to be tenured and you want to be a part of that atmosphere, that's great. And I definitely would support you doing that. I just hope you take a look at this other side of the lens, other side of the coin, through the lens that I see it, and really think about these things and what is the best for the patient? Are these outcomes actually what's proven? Or are we missing something that we should be able to look into? So I hope you found this useful. I have my next few talks coming up. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Medicare Advantage plan and how it's not so advantageous to patients or the healthcare industry. There's a couple good articles about that. And then I was going to talk about this here about how private practices can leverage themselves to help their own overhead and help their costs and stuff. But I feel like, that's like another 30, 40 minute talk in itself. So I figured, why not stop this episode around now, and then we'll pick that up in a couple episodes from now, or maybe next episode, and we'll punt the Medicare Advantage to a further episode. Also, I'm going to start tagging some people and that I refer to in this chat, and if I miss you, please let me know so I can go back and tag you. And I also just want to encourage you, if you're finding this useful, please share it. Please show your friends, residents, students, fellows, anyone in the medicine world that might find this useful. I really made a commitment this past few weeks to I want to provide more and more value to everyone out there. And that even includes that some residents and students have messaged me to ask if they can come rotate with me. I'm happy to host residents and students and even fellows, at least shadow. And then if there wants to be a formal rotation, we can see what we need to do to get that taken care of. I say this often, I'm not the arbitrator of anything. I don't know everything. I don't want to pretend like I know everything. I just know it from my lens, and I want to help share that. And as I continue to grow and evolve and people ask me questions, I'm going to continue to learn things, and I want to continue to give this value out there to people. So please leave me a message on my social media. Give me some questions and comments in the comment section below. Give a like, subscribe, and looking forward to talking to you guys again. Take care.